So hello and welcome to this short interview series that we've been doing with leaders in the affordable housing field and community development fields. My name is Mike Loftin. I'm a non-resident fellow at the Urban Institute, and I'm also CEO of Homewise. Homewise is a New Mexico-based nonprofit that works really hard to increase access to home ownership, and for a couple of reasons. It's a good source of affordable housing, and it's a really good way to for people to gain some wealth and get ahead. So today, Laura Arce is joining us, really excited about, who's at UnidosUS, and we're going to discuss what they're doing nationally in the Latino community to help increase access to home ownership and help people get ahead, because that's what we care about, right?
Exactly.
All right. So Laura, so thanks for joining us, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So you were at Unidos a while ago, and then you came back, right? So this is a homecoming for you, and now you're in charge of what you're calling, I believe, the Economic Trajectory Big Bet. So tell us about that. What is that? It's kind of a cool title.
Yeah.
For your project. Yeah.
Right. So well, let me start, Mike, by thanking you for inviting me to be part of your interview series. I'm really happy to join you and just have a conversation around what UnidosUS is doing around advancing Latino homeownership. So UnidosUS is the country's largest Hispanic civil rights organization. We're based in DC, and we've been around for over 50 years, and we've long worked on issues to help the Latino community succeed in America. And a big part of that has been around wealth building and specifically housing and homeownership. And so a couple of years ago, or last year, our board of directors made a commitment toward transforming the economic trajectory of Latinos toward generational wealth building and looking at homeownership specifically as the tool to achieve that. And so we set an institutional goal that by 2030, we would help create 4 million new Latino homeowners to try to reach a 60% Latino homeownership rate by 2030.
So that's pretty ambitious. Because what's the homeownership rate today?
Today, well, as the last quarter of 2021, it was just over 48%. So it is very ambitious. If you look at what the trajectory has been for Latinos, we have seen some marginal improvements over the last couple of decades for Latino homeownership. We added approximately 2 million new Latino homeowners in the past 10 years or so. So what we're saying is that by the end of this decade, we want to double that. So it's certainly ambitious. But I also think it's achievable if we collectively as a country really double down and prioritize the importance of Latino homeownership.
Right. So what's in the way? What are the barriers for Latinos to be able to buy a home?
Yeah, so there are a number of factors, and some of these are, just some of the big challenges that face, many first-time or first-generation home buyers, particularly in today's environment with high inflation, the lack of availability of affordable homes. There are a number of challenges. For Latinos specifically, some of the other additional challenges that bubble up around savings for a down payment. Latinos tend to be over-indexed in sectors that are less well-paying, as well as issues around debt to income and how income is measured in the underwriting criteria. And then if you start digging a little deeper, there's some additional factors that, again, are unique to Latinos. So for example, Latinos are more likely than other groups to be self-employed. And as we know, being a self-employed person, it's more challenging to get approval for a loan than it is for your more traditional W-2 worker.
Right. No, that's right. Well, the down payment thing seems like a really big thing in terms of the home ownership gap, right? And it makes sense. And this is a well understood thing, right? It's what people call the intergenerational transfer of wealth. I mean, when my wife and I bought our first home, her grandmother helped us with a down payment because she had owned more than one home before. And which meant we could buy a home at a way younger age than if we had to save the whole down payment ourselves. So that if your parents weren't able to buy a home or couldn't, and up until 1968, it was legal to discriminate against people of color in mortgage lending until we passed the Fair Housing Act. So not only it wasn't that they couldn't; they weren't allowed to get a mortgage. So if prior generations didn't weren't able to own a home and generate wealth, they're not in a position to help their kids. Is that, and you think that's is applying here in your work?
Right. No, that's absolutely right. I mean, this issue of generational wealth and the transfer of generational wealth is a really key element. I mean, it's one thing about saving for a down payment, but we know that, you know, Latinos, as compared to white households, are less likely to inherit wealth from past generations. And so being able to be in a position to help with that down payment, as you noted, that's the way a lot of households in the United States historically have been able to get their start into homeownership, but that hasn't been a path that's been as easily accessible for Latino families.
Yeah. You know, and I think this intergenerational transfer of wealth and the ability to source a down payment, you know, it's a generally recognized thing. One thing I've been thinking about more recently, and I'll tell you why, is what I would call the intergenerational transfer of credit. And this is why I started thinking about this. I have a son who bought a home at a young age in New Orleans. I'm visiting him. We're going for a walk. And he goes, yeah, it's like my friends are still blown away that at 20 something, I own a home. And they're like, why is your credit so good? And how are you able to do that and stuff? And I go, yeah, that's a good question. And he goes, well, Dad, you know why? I go, no, tell me why. He goes, well, because when I was in college, you and Mom got me a credit card so that I could cover expenses without having to call you all the time. And you paid that credit card on time every month, and I got the credit rating from it. So if your parents didn't have access to credit or weren't using credit, and you don't, you know, oftentimes our children benefit from that same set of behavior, right? That if you don't have parents that did that, it's not even a possibility, right? So it's, I think we underestimate the amount of things that, you know, kind of, call them privileges, right? But that these advantages that we have that are not even on our radar, they're not conscious, right? But we pass them on to our children, and our obligation as a society is to make sure other people have those same opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point and distinction on the credit piece. I remember when I was in college, a really close friend of mine, she had a car, and she came from a white household, and her parents, they bought the car for her. They had enough money to do so, but they took out a car loan in her name, and they set up a bank account. So every month it would automatically deduct the payment. And I remember her telling me about this. And the point was that it would allow her to build her credit. So she would have that credit payment history over time. And that just blew my mind as something that it never would have occurred to anyone in my family. And in fact, I think about my grandfather, who barely trusted banks, and he was very anti-credit. And he actually every month would go to, you know, the utility office, the phone company, all the different offices downtown, and pay his bill in cash and want his receipt showing that he'd paid in cash, and then go home. And so you have different perspectives. And the truth is, in the United States, you know, your credit history is such an important part of your being able to participate in our economy. But for some cultures, we have a very different view of credit that doesn't quite fit with that. And that is a disadvantage in the economy that we live in.
Yeah. Well, and there's legitimate, real fears there, because we all know people who overuse credit and got in a lot of trouble. So avoiding credit is, it's a pretty sensible thing oftentimes, right? It's like, I always think, like, because at Homewise, we help a lot of people buy a home, and lots of people don't have any credit rating. So we help them get a secured credit card, and they go, what do you mean? Like, I don't want credit cards. I don't want to get in trouble with this. I like paying as I go. It's and it's like, you got to give them kind of counterintuitive advice if you're going to establish credit.
It's a delicate balance. I think, on the one side, we have to explain the importance of having a credit history, but having the right kind of credit history.
Right, exactly.
And it is nuanced.
Right. Well, exactly. So tell me a little bit. I got a couple more questions for you. One is, like, on what you just said. So you're a network of groups all over the country, many of whom do home ownership work. This kind of thing, like accessing the right kind of credit, not any kind of credit, is like really helpful advice to people, right? So what is Unidos doing, like, with your membership, and how are you thinking about how to help the boots on the ground, right? How to create a delivery system that helps people access home ownership. I also want to ask you about policy stuff, but let's talk about the nitty gritty first. What kind of things are you doing to help your membership, or what are your members doing that are, doing the retail end of this work?
Yeah. So I think, the biggest asset that we have at Unidos for this, initiative that we're launching is really that affiliate base, and both the expertise and the trust and the work that's happening in communities across the country. And so the various elements we're working with. So, first we have a network within our bigger affiliate network of approximately 50 nonprofit housing counseling agencies that are focused on helping families prepare for homeownership. And so working with them on what are the challenges in their local market, how we can scale up what they're already doing really well. Another piece is part of our affiliate network focuses on the production side. And so one example, we have a community development financial institution, the Raza Development Fund, that we established about 25 years ago. And their primary mission is to help our affiliate network finance the production of affordable housing and community facilities. So we're looking at how can we use our CDFI to leverage some of the work that our local affiliates are doing on the ground to increase the availability and supply of affordable housing. So part of that is just looking at what our groups are doing already and helping them do more of it and to scale it up. But another big piece where I think Unidos, can really add some value and augment the work that's already happening on the ground is elevating this issue of Latino homeownership nationally. And so looking at what we can do from a research lens, for example, from a narrative communications lens, from public policy, we think it's really important that we do what we can to increase the political and the public will to focus on Latino homeownership, because it matters not just to our community, but also to the broader economy. And the truth is, with these ambitious goals, we can't do it alone. So we need to have all the levers in place, both at the national level as well as in local markets and local communities.
Now, that makes a lot of sense. So tell me about the public policy stuff work that you're doing, and what are you thinking about, and what could, not just the federal policy level, but at the state and local levels too. What kinds of things are you thinking about? What would be helpful to move the needle there?
Yeah, so this year is our planning year, and so a lot of these questions are what we're teasing out and working with our affiliate base and with our partners and friends, groups like yours, like Homewise, who are doing this, work and have, I know, a lot of really great ideas. They're certainly at the federal level looking at, on the lending side, for access to credit, the work that we can do to enhance around the GSE lending and increasing. So that more Latinos are getting approved for GSE loans through Fannie and Freddie. What we can do to enhance and improve the FHA program. Latinos are most likely to use the FHA product, so how can we make that better work in today's market? And then also, I think there's a lot of influence we can have on market practices just more generally, which isn't necessarily, policy with a capital P, but I do think is important policy. So looking, for example, at diversity, within the mortgage industry, and do we have, Latino loan officers and senior executives of banks where they're building and developing the products? At a more local level, I think there is where we would certainly be talking with our affiliate network to see what makes sense. It's interesting. You have some states, like in California, for example, they have really generous down payment assistance programs. But the challenge there is, inventory and the availability of houses. So, what needs to, so maybe some of the policy changes there in local communities around zoning, construction and so on. There are other communities where, in parts of Texas, for example, where there actually are communities that have a long history of generational Latino homeownership, but the challenge is the transfer of that homeownership. So looking at, taxes, at help with rehab in rehabilitation of housing, I think is really important, so we maintain the homeownership that already exists. So the answer is not going to be the same in every community. So we're diving deep into different types of markets to see what are the changes that are needed and how can Unidos be most helpful for those affiliates on the ground.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. It's like we need to be working to increase accessibility of affordable housing, of home ownership, but also in many markets we have to be adding to supply. It's just not
exactly. Yeah.
So one thing to get on your radar and our radar is that HUD has the federal home program that's over $1 billion a year for affordable housing. 70% of that used to be used to promote home ownership. Now it's less than a third of it, partly because they changed the regs at one point and made it really, really difficult to use home money for home ownership. So there's an effort to reform those regs and make it easier, and I think there's receptivity on that. And that's something that we really need to bring over the finish line, because local governments get allocations of home money, and they could be making a big impact, but the regs don't allow for it. So that needs it. And then the same thing, like with the Capital Magnet Fund at the CDFI Fund, is another really good source of money that could be used for down payment assistance and home ownership. But they took some of the home regs, which included a price limit on the home you're allowed to help someone with, which means, like in Atlanta, 9% of the homes that come on the market meet that price limit. So it's like you can barely use it. And the few places you can use it tend to be disinvested neighborhoods where homes are cheap, which means it's a form of redlining. So we really got to change some of this. It's not just new money coming in, but can we change the regs in a way that are friendly to helping people use it to fulfill their dream, right, of owning their own home. So I think there's a lot of policy work. What about on the philanthropic? Well, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that I agree with you when you think about the policy change. I mean, oftentimes people assume it means a new program, a new law, but I think there's certainly a lot of work we can do to enhance the tools that we already have in the toolkit. And I think the home program is a great example. We've certainly been hearing from our affiliates across, a number of communities that, they would love some reforms to the home program to be able to do more of what they're doing to advance home ownership.
No, I think there's you could see light at the end of the tunnel on some of these issues. There's progress we could make. What about last question is, what about philanthropy? Do you see them making a move? Because in my opinion, philanthropy, especially national philanthropy, has been checked out on the home ownership front. I think they would, if we were going to give them a grade, I'd give them an F. They're just not paying attention. What's your sense of that? And do you think is my assessment right? Or do you think there's a shift there? Is there a growing interest in this, given the attention to the racial wealth gap and stuff? Or, what do you see?
So, I mean, I'll start by saying that we certainly need them at the table. I mean, again, that the challenges are really big. And so we need everyone at the table on this. I agree with you generally speaking. I do think on the philanthropy side, it seems to be that the focus ebbs and flows, either based on what's in the media or different strategic plans, and in terms of having reliable, consistent investment from the philanthropic community on homeownership has been a challenge. But I do think that, and more, housing is so high on the list in terms of challenges. I think one thing that's sort of UnidosUS, Homewise, and other organizations that are, like-minded organizations, probably need to do some work on is working on that public will and that political will to focus on homeownership. Because while, we can think about Latino homeownership, even just generally on the homeownership side, it's really easy to look at the crisis happening across the board, across the housing continuum. And sometimes it distracts folks. And so reminding, people about the importance of homeownership, not just for the, generational wealth building, which I think is a really important piece, but also around stability in local communities, bringing that on. So, I think we need, philanthropy at the table. I do wish they were a little higher on there than they are today. There are some exceptions, but I think we could also do more to underscore what the opportunities and what the challenges are to bring them forward.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I think just close with this, is that this stuff is doable. This is not, you don't have to be a genius to help people get into a home. So I think if we have more of the will and we put the kind of attention you're trying to get focused on this issue, it's really going to help, because it's just a matter of prioritizing. Yeah. This is just a very important thing that America needs to do, for the people who live here and for our future. So thank you very much, Laura. This is a great conversation.